presentation. I don't know if it's going to be 5 or 15 minutes, but tried to go over the key aspects of the Sunshine Law. And in the past, when I've done presentations like this, I alternate between reading every single word on the slide and then spending 10 seconds on a slide and skipping over to the next one. I'm not sure which way it's going to go yet today. So if the first 2 slides I'm really boring, it might get better. And if the first 3 minutes are incredible, it's going to get worse quick. So one or the other is going to happen. But let's talk about the Sunshine Law. So in the Florida Constitution, we have language that all meetings of a public body, such as a county, municipality, or a community redevelopment agency, those words don't appear in the Constitution, but it applies to you all meetings at which official acts are to be taken shall be open and noticed to the public, except with certain exemptions, none of which generally apply to you. Litigation strategy, collective bargaining strategy, security discussions can sometimes. There's very limited exceptions in Florida law. If any of you came down here from another state in the past, a lot of other states are not as strict as Florida. So sometimes I get board members who moved down here and thought, well, it was only 2 of us talking, so what's wrong with that? I thought it's only like if 3 of us talk, then we have a problem. No, not in Florida. So Florida has a very strict sunshine law, and I've already broken it. There we go. So long ago, the Florida legislature put a statute out, and based on that constitutional provision, and there's 3 essential requirements for the sunshine law. Your meetings have to be open to the public, as they always are. We have to provide reasonable notice of such meetings, and then minutes of the meetings must be taken. So what is a meeting, though? Because it's important, because to go back, it'll be on the next slide, okay. So a meeting is when there's any gathering. If 2 of you meet for lunch, if you were to talk about business related to the CRA, that would be a meeting, and it could not occur unless it complies with the Sunshine Law. So when there's any gathering, whether formal or informal, of 2 or more members of the same board or commission to discuss matters where something could come before you in the future, likely come before you in the future, then you can't do that unless it's a public meeting. So notice it says 2 or more members of the same board. If you want to talk about redevelopment issues with a city council member, as long as it's just 1, that's generally permissible. If you want to talk about your business with members of the public, that's permissible outside a public meeting. You just cannot talk about your business with any of the other people sitting next to you or other members of this board outside of a public meeting. Doesn't matter if it's a text message, an email, or a phone call. It doesn't have to be in person. Any sort of discussion is prohibited outside of a public meeting. So as this slide goes over what I just said 10 seconds ago. Emails are forbidden because of the Sunshine Law. You cannot email your other board members about business likely to come before you. It doesn't mean you can't email them about how you blew them out in fantasy football last weekend, and now you're going to the playoffs and they're not. Which sadly is not my case after yesterday, but even with 2 games tonight, I've already been eliminated. But I digress. So you can talk about non-board business with other board members, but you cannot talk about board business. No emails, no telephone conversations, no internet discussions, and you can tell I've recycled part of this presentation because I still have the word chat rooms in there. If those are still a thing, I haven't used them in 15 years, but no chat rooms, no blogs, no comments. If one of your fellow board members likes to put out blogs or positions on social media, do not comment on those posts. That would be a violation of the Sunshine Law. No text messages. No discussions during recess or after adjournment of a public meeting. So just because you're all in the same room and this was a meeting, once we adjourn at 8, I think Taylor said she's hoping to be done by 8:57 tonight. No talking about board business after that. Now, no indirect conversations either. I've heard this referred to as daisy chaining. I'm not sure if that's a term anymore, but You can talk to staff at any time about board business, but you cannot ask staff what other board members are saying or ask staff to relay a message to another board member. Just because you can't use an intermediary to get around the Sunshine Law. The Sunshine Law is strict. So always reach out to staff with your questions, but no, do not use staff as a go-between.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Certainly.
In reference to that, if there's a document that needs to be distributed to all of the board members from a board member, goes to staff, and then staff does distribution of that,
So-
whatever the information may be.
So that's a one-way communication, and that is fine. But if you receive one of those from another board member, you cannot respond to anything in that communication. Now, I will say, I always hesitate to talk about this because it's a slippery slope. More so with larger cities and large counties, I've seen multiple position papers, if you will, go out. And as long as the second position paper does not respond to the first position paper in any way, technically that's in compliance with the Sunshine Law. It's kind of frowned upon by the attorneys like myself, because you're getting close to, if you accidentally say, unlike my colleague in their paper from yesterday, I disagree. Whoops, no, you've gone too far. So, but yes, go through staff. If there's any one-way communication that has to go out to the other board members, it should never be in response to one of their communications related to an upcoming business event, business item. I mentioned earlier, so I'm not really going to go over this, but this is some of those exceptions to the Sunshine Law in general. Generally, most of these will rarely, if ever, apply to the Community Redevelopment Agency. But litigation, collective bargaining, fact-finding committees who have no authority other than fact-finding, security systems, some solicitation processes are limited exceptions. So notice, the meetings have to be open to the public, publicly noticed, open to the public, and minutes have to be taken are those three requirements. So let's talk about notice for a minute. Notice must be reasonable, and then this is just for your edification. Staff generally will handle all of the notice aspects for this board. Generally, the notice should say the time, place, and subject matter. That's generally why we have an agenda. It shows the business that's expected to be taken up at a meeting. Notice it's aspirational that notice be provided at least 7 days prior to a meeting. Special meetings, no less than 24 hours and preferably at least 72 hours prior to the meeting. And by all means, this is more for staff than the board members. Use press releases, email, and faxes to spread notice of a meeting. There's nothing wrong with that. The minutes. Again, staff function is the minutes, but so you guys understand. All meetings require recorded minutes, including workshops. Well, when I say recorded, I don't mean tape recorder. It's not as long as it's a best practice that we use tape recorders and other recording devices, but under Florida law, anyone taking down minutes is bare bone notes of what happened at a meeting is sufficient under the Sunshine Law. As minutes are intended as a brief summary of the meeting, verbatim transcript is not required. Minutes must be in written format, and as I just said, audio recordings are optional. So there's no rules on or laws on how detailed the minutes have to be, or that they have to be verbatim, or there has to be a video or audio recording. Just minutes have to be taken. Not actually originally in the Sunshine Law, but a law that was passed about 12 years ago I want to talk about. Again, I'm trying to give you guys, big picture related topics as well, not just the literal text of the Sunshine Law. There is a right of public participation in Florida. As of 2013, I think was the year this bill was passed. And the public has a right to speak on an item before the board takes official action. Again, I went more technical with these bullet points than is probably necessary. Sometimes, more so at city council where there's 2 public hearings, or city council where something may come up and they take public comment and then it comes back up. It doesn't always have to occur at the same meeting, but there has to be the opportunity for public participation. That doesn't prevent you or any other board from maintaining standards of conduct and decorum. Doesn't mean someone can come up here and say all 5 of you are useless. There's a lot of local governments have gadflies, and it's alternatively hilarious and cringeworthy when you see some of these people in action. After I've been here about 8 months now, and I haven't seen any that bad here, so that's knock on wood. Jacksonville Beach avoids some of the characters I've seen in other locales when I've worked elsewhere in the state. So we can't, someone can't use vulgar words at you. That could be prohibited. So public participation doesn't give them the right to say whatever they want. We can have standards of conduct and decorum.
May I interrupt for just a second to confirm
Yes.
something?
Sure.
So I have been here for 12 years and I've had multiple chairs who do things a little differently from each other. So is there a practice that their current next chair will maybe utilize that when it comes to public speaking? Do you recommend that you do this public speaking cards or the questioning cards before the whole meeting starts? Or do you suggest that you bring up the topic, or the chair brings up the topic and then brings people up who are talking about that at that time? Like, is there a specific standard of accepting that public comment?
So what I've noticed to be the custom here, at least more so with city council, which I'm involved, is accepted meeting cards ahead of the meeting, but nonetheless, still pointed out during the agenda item, if you watch city council meetings, Mayor Hoffman frequently says, that's all the speaker cards I have, but would anyone else like to comment on this item? I think that's a good approach to take. Having the cards ahead of time helps the meeting run smoothly, but we should never, if someone wants to come up and didn't fill out a speaker card, I think you should always allow them time to come up, provided they haven't already spoken. Don't give them, they get 3 minutes or however many minutes. Doesn't mean they could come back up for an additional bite at the apple. But, the conversation on an agenda item could go off on a different direction than they were anticipating, so they didn't initially fill out a speaker card, and now they want to speak. So I think collecting the cards ahead of time helps the meeting run orderly, but always allow additional public comment if someone asks during the item.
But do the public speaking cards for each item, not all in the front before you start the whole. Because we've had one where they would collect all the cards in the beginning, then it's this person wants to talk about this agenda, this person wants to talk about this agenda, and they would do all of them before we even started our meeting. And then we've had others where it's like, we're going to talk about this now, and these are the speaker cards I have. Is there a right or wrong?
I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's at the discretion of the chair.
Okay.
You guys can always discuss it at a public meeting, not outside a public meeting, at any time in the future, and give feedback to the chair on how you guys would like it to run.
But as long as they're collected and the people are given the opportunity, there's no actual structure that's required.
Correct.
Okay, I was just making sure.
No problem.
Mr. Chairman, can I add something to that comment, just to kind of clarify? The reason I think, at least recently, with at least the last chair, and even towards the latter half of the previous chair, it was done the way it was to mimic that of what city council does. So that's why courtesy of the floor came prior. We start the meeting, we do a roll call, approve our minutes, and then we immediately have courtesy of the floor. That was to, like I said, mimic what council does. And then for us, it was unique because I can't honestly recollect many scenarios where someone wanted to necessarily address one specific item. It was just kind of more generic addressing the board. But at that moment, I think what we would follow, like council, is if somebody had a specific agenda item they wanted to address, at that moment, we would give the opportunity to come up then, or they can wait until their agenda item. But we always try to mirror what city council does.
Thank you.
Yeah. A few months ago, we had a speaker come forward and present his point of view, and then proceed to try to elicit response and initiate a discussion. That would be a nice word for it. And you and our chairman
had said, they don't have a right to get their questions answered on the spot. It's helpful when someone has questions to direct them to, reach out to staff moving forward. We don't want you to think, well, it's too late, we're not, no one's gonna talk to you. But for the orderly transaction of business, it's perfectly permissible to not answer questions during public comment.
I thought that was handled beautifully, but I think it's important to touch on that for everybody here, because that was a unique event. And you and the chairman handled it, and I think it worked out just great, but I think that really should be a model for the future. You've made your comments. Thank you very much. We're not here to have discussion or debate. Thank you.
Discussion or debate with the public. You all should discuss and debate the item before you vote on it.
Got that.
I know, I was just,
But thanks a lot.
Yes,
I
no
think that was
problem.
super duper, because that could have turned into a real situation. Thank you.
no problem. So my last slide is about penalties and sanctions. So unintentional violations are non-criminal, but a knowing violation can be a second-degree misdemeanor, punishable by a fine of not more than $500 and a jail term of not more than 60 days. You can also be removed from office. Let me leave you with a story from, I believe it was 2020. And so I am going to say the name of the city because this is a true story. In Indian River County, there's a city called Sebastian, Florida, about 3-4 hours down I-95. So they had 3 new city council members elected on a board of 5 city council members, I believe end of 2019. They wanted to affect radical change. Radical is probably not the right word. They wanted to affect change. Especially with the COVID pandemic that unexpectedly came up. Things were moving too slow for them. They wanted to fire the city manager, the city attorney, and the city clerk. They decided to, without publicly noticing it, in a locked city hall, they held a meeting. They claimed they held a meeting, and they voted to fire the city manager, fire the city attorney, and fire the city clerk. Someone recorded the meeting on their phone, and the last thing you hear as they seem to be quickly adjourning is the police are arriving outside. I think it was maybe live streamed on Facebook or something like that. But it was not a publicly noticed meeting. It was not open to the public. I don't know if they took minutes or not, but the first 2 steps were violated. It was intentional. That if they had handled things the right way, maybe they could have accomplished the actions they wanted to in that meeting. But none of the actions were valid. They were void. I believe one of the 3 pled no contest and did not get a criminal sentence. The second one wound up being sentenced to 60 days in jail. And the third one, who, from reading it, seemed like may have been kind of the quote-unquote ringleader, did get sentenced to 6 months in jail for violating the Sunshine Law. So while these things don't happen every day, they can be criminal in your most egregious situations. But I'm not saying don't violate the law egregiously. I'm telling you don't violate the law at all. With that, I hope that was a good overview, got into a little bit of nuances. I know you've all, as far as I know, you guys have all been on the board for a while. I could be wrong on that, but so, I know you know the concept in general, but hopefully this was still helpful. I'll gladly answer any questions if you have it. Yes, sir.
I just have one question, and I don't know if this board has done this before, but in other boards, when we have orientation, we'll go out to a venue or a site. So if this board decided to have a meet off-site, say at the boardwalk about activation or something like that, can the Sunshine Law accommodate that?
So that's a tricky situation. There's generally a way to do it. I would say if something like that comes up, I'm going to be like, Taylor, we need to talk a few weeks ahead of time.
Yeah.
We need to make sure, that the public can attend in some fashion. We want to make sure that the other requirements of the Sunshine Law are complied with. What we probably can't do is a minibus tour of the city, because even if we publicly notice it and we take minutes, even if there's 4 extra seats, what if 30 members of the public wanted to attend? We're not allowing the public to participate in that. Whereas if you're going to a boardwalk, I think if we provide specific enough notice as to where this meeting's going to be, that the public can attend and minutes can be taken, it can be accomplished. But let's not do that last minute. If you guys, get a sense of an example like yours is something that you guys want to happen, give Taylor advance notice and I'll work with her to see if we can, get to yes. And in doing that, the concern will be making sure we can comply with the sunshine law.
Just another observation, based on how strict the sunshine law is, it really is, I guess, apparent that the time for us to have good discussions are either at our meetings or workshops. That if there are projects that we want to talk about brainstorming or creative ideas related to those projects, it really needs to be discussed in these meetings so that we can put all of the thoughts on the table and hopefully, move forward in a certain direction based on staff recommendations and things to that extent. But we need to have that open conversation here before it goes anywhere else.
Yes, the one thing I'll say is, by all means, on an individual basis, talk to staff for more factual stuff, so that don't wait until the meeting to come up to speed factually, because hey, we have to discuss it at the meeting anyway. So I'll just learn what's going on then. I know that's not your question really, but still utilize staff on a one-on-one basis. Remember, don't ask about what other board members think or have said. But then yes, at the meetings, this is your shot. Sometimes if you watch a lot of these meetings, in a general sense across the state, you'll hear some really elementary questions being asked, and I've actually heard elected officials say, because they almost felt like, geez, I probably sound dumb, but they're like, look, the reason I'm asking this question is this is my only chance to talk to my colleagues, so I want to make sure I understand their position completely and I'm not misinterpreting anything. No question's a dumb question to begin with, but, ask anything and everything amongst your colleagues in a public meeting to make sure you understand or you want to get your input out, say your input. But yes, this time is valuable, and, sometimes agenda items will take a while to flush out, but unfortunately it has to be done, well, not unfortunately. The reality is, it has to be done in a public meeting.
I have a little different question for you. Is there any leeway or ability for someone who may not be able to attend the meeting, say that you have a quorum, but then they review the stuff and they provide the information to staff? Staff cannot share those opinions or talking points to the board during a public meeting, or can they?
They can. They can read. You will not have a vote because you're not there. There are, in exceptional circumstances, someone may be able to attend remotely. A lot of hoops to jump through. I didn't even have to research if city council would authorize it. I'm not sure. But if there's a quorum, I'm going beyond the scope of your question, but let me just add this. If there's a quorum already present in the room, a board member can attend remotely, but there has to be, according to Florida Attorney General opinions, extraordinary circumstances. Not just, well, I'm on vacation, but I wanted to chime in.
Like when, for instance, when I had COVID, for instance, I read the stuff, wanted to kind of give my opinion and what have you, but I wasn't sure if I could have that read or not because, yes, I wasn't here, but also it was contagious. So I'm just wondering for future, if someone here gets ill or they're in the hospital or death in the family or something, since we can't use it as a conduit, if whoever's here in 2025 on can still give an opinion that could be read.
It can be read, yes, and you just can't,
You
You just can't have it.
no back and forth dialogue
Yeah,
outside the
right.
meeting.
And I've done that in the past, I think at several meetings, if you go back and listen. I know for a fact, like when David has had to miss unexpectedly at the last minute, he will contact me, only me, doesn't copy board members and say, hey, I can't come, I know this is a big item, this is kind of my thoughts, and then at the meeting, once we've started the meeting and it's being a public recorded meeting, then I share his sentiments or whomever.
And that's okay to do,
Mhm.
because I've done that to
Mhm.
you once.
Yep.
So,
But
I
clarify,
wanted
they
to
can't-
make
you
sure
can't
that's
cover
good.
Yes,
Question.
they cannot, yeah, so the intent of staff sharing that is not to, I can't vote for Megan or David or whomever, but at least the board member knows everybody's thoughts and comments in a public, open meeting.
And it doesn't consider you a conduit at that point for that specific reason.
No, because you're reading it at the public meeting.
Okay.
Any other questions?
It doesn't look like we have any other questions, David. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all. If I didn't have a city council meeting tonight, I would stick around to see the rest of the presentations, but I apologize. I need to, like the agenda tonight, I need to prepare even more so. If I don't see you all, and I probably won't have a very happy holiday season, look forward to continue to work with you all. Thank you.
Happy holidays to you, and thank you.
And full disclosure, David and I did sit down and look at this last week. I knew he might not be able to stick around, but I did sit down and look at it. So if I get something wrong, I'm gonna blame him.
Wait, you want to have it remixed?
With that, we will move to the second item on our agenda, and that is to have our presentation on the CRA fundamentals. And
Yes, sir.
Taylor, I believe you're going to be doing the presentation.
I will.
All right.
And so with that, we're gonna dive in. This is stuff that has been kind of pulled together from, like I said, the city attorney and myself, and then a lot of my coursework in getting my redevelopment administrator certification. So this is from several other redevelopment agencies, from the FRA, city attorney. We kind of thought it was a good time while we had a little bit of a slower season. Nothing's ever slow anymore, but to just kind of do a refresher course. This is definitely not 101. This is a step above that. I'm going to try not to bore you with all the little details, but this is just kind of reminding everyone, because when it's things that we're not in every single day, and I recognize that all of you have lives and careers and things to do outside of this as a volunteer board, you're not constantly looking at chapter 163 like I probably look at it 3 times a day for one reason or another. So again, we'll kind of dive into this. The agenda for this presentation is really a lot of who, what, when, where, why. We're going to talk about why we even have redevelopment agencies, what they are, kind of what ours is structured like, to construct them differently, how we got here, how we can and cannot redevelop, because there are very strict, clear guidelines on what you can and cannot do. I will talk a little bit about increment revenue, because oftentimes at public meetings, you're here, you're going to have to raise my taxes, you're going to have to raise my taxes, and that's not a concern. If I, like I said, was not living in this every day, I would probably have the same concerns, but when you learn what increment revenue is, you realize that's not the case. Valuing the increment revenue, spending it, the plan, and then reporting. I will say on reporting, we're going to do a really high level today, and then I believe it's scheduled tentatively right now for March or April. We're going to do a really in-depth workshop meeting only, so it'll be a full 2-hour workshop on the new reporting requirements that have to be in place by the board by end of calendar year 2025. So with that being said, why do we do this? So chapter 163 of the state statute, basically it is to get rid of slum and blight areas. That is the most basic general way you can put it. The reason CRAs exist is because there became a need in the state of Florida back in 1969 where they realized we need to do something to be able to redevelop areas that otherwise were falling into states of disrepair. The state defines slum and blight very clearly in statute. Again, I won't read word for word, but it has some unique defining, I guess, things that, you think slum and blight, you just think, okay, it's not pretty. This is not just about aesthetics. It talks about crime, disease, anything that's going to create economic and social liabilities, anything that's going to put a burden on the district, juvenile delinquency, and then one that's really unique is an area that's consuming excessive use of police, fire, hospitalization, and services that are not sufficient to a good quality of life. Community redevelopment, again, is in all of these references section of the statute. So again, in your spare time, or if you need to put yourself to sleep at night, I encourage you to go and start reading chapter 163. There's a lot in there. But again, it means the undertakings, activities, and projects in the community redevelopment area for the following. So again, these are all things that constitute redevelopment, eliminating and preventing that slum blight that we just talked about. And again, it talks about the crime, affordable housing. And again, these are things that you can do. This does not mean it has to be done, but we'll touch on that more later. Again, slum clearance, any type of rehab revitalization, conservation of the community redevelopment area, and then also anything to prepare a plan or to get that district ready. So any of the studies, any planning, any staff, anything you need to do to be able to create a redevelopment agency. It is defined in Chapter 163, 356, Part 1, defines what a community redevelopment agency is. That definition is really long, so I was not going to put it on here to read. But again, it talks about finding a necessity and then essentially the power to function within the municipality if and when the governing body has by resolution concurred that the redevelopment plan or plans are needed. So again, all the way back for us in 1987, they decided that this was necessary. Another thing to remember, we are a dependent special district. So we have independent special districts and we have dependent special districts. So we are dependent and we meet there's 4 criteria. Ours that we meet is all members of the governing body are appointed. Or of this board are appointed. So we rely on the city council. Everyone on this board is appointed by the governing body. And then the district also has this board has a budget that requires approval through affirmative vote or can be vetoed by the governing body. So those 2 criteria are why we are a dependent special district. Board members are again all appointed. Per the statute, you can have 5 to 9 members. You have 4-year terms and members cannot be compensated. The governing body can be your CRA. It does not have to be, but it absolutely can. And the CRAs can have multiple districts, and in fact, some, like Tampa, has several CRAs, and they have different advisory boards for every district. So they have a whole lot. And then each district has to have a separate trust fund, a separate plan, a separate accounting, separate uses. You have to keep all of your funding separate. This is really a big summary of kind of how we got here, starting all the way back in '69 when the Florida Redevelopment Act passed. A couple of things to touch on is it was not until '77 that tax increment financing came about. And then also the elected body that same year was allowed to be a CRA board. I did some research to try to figure out how those 2 correlated, but I couldn't find enough in the Attorney General's website, but I'm sure there's a correlation on allowing councils and commissions and also allowing for TIF spending. And then in the 80s, the Supreme Court, they got a lot of cases on citizens, business owners, residents, you name it, essentially suing cities and basically claiming that increment revenue was not a thing. Again, it's always held up that increment revenue is not an additional tax. It is what it is, increment revenue. A couple of things added to the blight definition. The big one in 2006, and this is actually a link to the Kelo case. This has to do with eminent domain. This has kind of always been a really big red flag, but specifically Florida passed a law in 2006 due to this Kelo case from up north that if anybody wanted to exercise eminent domain, there had to be a 10-year waiting period before transferring land taken by eminent domain and prohibited the use of eminent domain for any private commercial development. So what they were afraid of is that councils, commissions, CRAs, whomever would use eminent domain, take property, and then turn around and give it to a developer. Yes, sir.
Just real briefly before we go on, looking at your first 3 slides, this started before I got here in the 80s. My impression is that the initial CRA impetus was taking down the property, renovating the parking lots, generally speaking, generally. Second, shifts we've been through along these rules that you're laying out, so that's my thought. Thank you.
Hey, it's a unique timeline, huh? And kind of on that Kilo case, I want to also be.
Fourth phase now.
Yeah. I'm not an attorney, so I had to get my interpretation from help with the attorney, because when you sit down and try and read this, I'm like, what? I don't understand, but I do want to point out, the Kilo case itself was in New London, and it actually affirmed the city's right to seize private land as part of economic development plans. So with the intent of cities to take property and then allow developers to come in and develop it, the aftermath of that, 47 states strengthened their eminent domain laws and 12 amended their state constitutions to prohibit the taking of private property for economic development purposes. So, sometimes there'll kind of conversations come about this property, this, and if you hear people kind of like, don't start talking about that, it's just, anytime you start talking about private property and wanting to develop it, I think people flash back to this 06 big debacle. Again, the 2019, right before I got here, but I am very well aware of this, they changed some language on what CRAs can and cannot spend money on. And then this year, we have been tasked with additional reporting. And like I said, we will dive very deep into that in the spring. So, how do we do this? What can we do? CRAs may, and again, big kind of flashing words here, you may, not must. Much like our plans, just because it's in it does not mean it has to be done. We can do things listed here. So, we can mortgage, we can provide insurance, we can solicit RFPs, RFQs, we can invest reserve funds, you can borrow money, planning for repair and rehab, and plan enforcement of state and local land use. Again, a lot of what's on this page, and I kind of coupled this all on this page, with the exception of the RFP and RFQ, we typically don't do this because of how we're structured with our city council. So a good example is Delray Beach. They're separate from their commission. So this kind of stuff, when you see projects they're doing, they're probably the one mortgaging and pledging or encumbering these funds, selling the property, insuring everything, but they're structured completely different than our city council structured us. So just because these things can be done and undertaken, these are not the way our city council set up this CRA. And again, these are again just straight out of the statute, goes back to some of that contracting, the acquiring and disposing of property at fair value. We learned a whole lot about that with our auction process in the south end. Streets, utilities, parks, playgrounds, you name it, we can do the installation of. Again, we've had a lot of experience with our streets, infrastructure, utilities, and playgrounds. Planning, surveying, that's another one. We do a lot of that because we have a lot of projects that are pretty big, pretty substantial, so it's going to take a lot of planning efforts. So these are typically the type of things that you'll see us doing often. And then that last one is developing and implementing our policing innovation, which is how we have our wonderful CAPE program. So these are the big no-nos. Don't do it, we will get in a lot of trouble. Eminent domain, very first one. We cannot use that as a function of redevelopment. We cannot build public buildings. So if City Hall wanted to be redone, we cannot do that. The only exceptions are like our CAPE storage building, for example, because that is a police building as a part of our policing innovation. So that is very clearly defined by statute. The other unique exception, there's always this weird gray area. If there was a public building that we needed, that was agreed upon by each taxing authority. So if the city decided we needed to build some new public building, they went to our taxing authority, which is Duval County, City of Jacksonville, and they came to an agreement and said, yes, you can do X, Y, and Z. We would have to enter into an agreement, and then the funds could then be allowed, in theory, to be used on a public building. But that is something that, at least in my research since I've been here and I've researched all of our interlocal agreements, that is not something that we have ever tried to bite off, and I can't imagine that would be something that administration would ever encourage.
So, Taylor, just for my information, how was South Beach Community Center initially done? Because that was done with CRA funding. And
Yes, it has a convention or community center. So that back half of the building that is open for public use, the public can rent it out, they can utilize it. In the statute, it defines it's not considered a public building if it has a public benefit, like a community center, meeting room, meeting space, conference space, and that portion of the building was considered by definition a community center meeting space.
And so the other portion that's used by the city,
It's completely allowable.
it's, they somehow funded that portion themselves versus the other parts of the building?
No, the CRA can fund it because a certain percentage of that building was for that public use, for that community center. So there are offices in there, but it was completely allowed by the statute at that time. Now, since then, in 2019, those reins did tighten in on statute, but in pre-2019, because that back part is considered a community center, you can then build necessary offices there to support said community center, and the Parks Department is the one who runs and operates the community center.
Thank you.
I know it does feel a little weird and wonky with some of that, and I actually had the very same question very early on when I started reading the statute, like, wait, this doesn't make sense, but it was a completely black and white allowable expense. And again, we've all heard about the CIP. If it's on council, it's gotta come off for 3 years before we can touch it. And we can also not offset just general government expenses that are unrelated to what we're supposed to do in our plan. All right, so we do not spend taxes, we spend increment revenue. A case I encourage everyone to look up again in your spare time, the 1980 Miami Beach CRA versus the state of Florida. This held up basically that increment revenue is an allowable expense, and it is not a tax on the citizens. It is not just a standard taxes, an obligation of the community. And then in 2006, there was another case, and it reaffirmed that 1980 decision and upheld that increment revenue is different than general taxes. And this is a super simple, they use this all the time at FRA. What increment revenue is, it shows your base year revenue is that part A in the black, the kind of green color is the B, so every year that your assessed value is going to go up, that taxable revenue is going to go up, so your increment revenue is going to go up, and then that right there is where your budget comes from. So it's pretty black and white. They do, on this one, show where CRA's sunset and then post-CRA revenue, but that is far above my head to get into. That is at the finance department, and I will leave that to them and appreciate the work that they do on all of that. So what can we spend that increment revenue on? Positions such as myself, our administrative and overhead expenses. Again, we say planning all the time, but any of our planning, surveying, things that we need to do that are part of the plan, we can purchase real property in the districts. We can do what we need to do to clear, prep, or relocate. That is one that we also have never done. That is a very gray area in the statute, and it seems like every time they update 163, the reins come in tighter and tighter on relocation of occupants. Again, not one we've ever touched. Can repay borrowed funds. Any expenses related to any bonds we may have, which we do not. You can develop low to moderate income housing, our policing innovation, and then our capital expenditures that are spelled out in our CIP every year. So I referenced, the plan in that last slide. These are things that are going to be in the redevelopment plan. We know, I didn't go too in depth on this because we literally just updated our plan, and it is well within what our statute requires us to have, but you've got to have a description of your area, what the uses are going to be, neighborhood impact if you've got a distinct housing project planned. You've got to show your public funded projects, which is where our CIP comes into play as an attachment to our plan every year when we update it. Again, we don't do relocation services, but if we did, those would need to be spelled out in our plan. And then, back to housing, that's again not something that we plan out as detailed as this would allow us to if we were wanted to. Our statement of project costs, which are our estimates, and again, those were those lovely charts that we had that kind of listed out the projects and initiatives we wanted to undertake in our estimated budget. And then just any general projects that we want to undertake. We've got to have it in the plan. And again, just because it's in there, it doesn't mean we have to do it. It's just there. But if it is not there, we cannot do it. So that's why you kind of typically see things that, even if it's just kind of pie in the sky, a dream at this time, it's going to usually be in the plan because at some point we may be in a place to act. This, and this should have been at the beginning, so forgive me. This one somehow ended up at the back, but this goes along with that slum and blight. The statute really goes in intense on defining blight. I will not bore you in reading all of these, but again, I think it surprises people. Like I said, when you hear Summit Light, you just think of dilapidated buildings or an ugly street. A lot of this has to do with faulty lot layouts, inadequate roads, building density patterns, unsanitary and unsafe conditions, high rates of crime. Fire and emergency calls are higher than anywhere else in town. This really looks at a much bigger picture than just an ugly building on a street corner. So that's why I kind of always put this in there, because I think it surprises people when they read what blight actually is. And then these are, again, I'll send these links out. These are links to things that we kind of look at. This CRA Basics one takes you to the FRA website. The bottom one takes you to the generic section of the FRA website. And then that middle one we kind of put in there. I've been in situations where folks don't understand even the legislative process and kind of what session looks like and how what they're doing at the state level can kind of trickle down and how it affects us. And so I added that from Florida League of Cities website as well. And so, the end of the presentation point, like I said, it was a very high level, kind of quick refresher course. I think this is stuff, you may not know by heart, but it's something I think we've all heard and read, especially those of us that have attended conferences. But I am happy to answer questions, and if I do not have an answer, I will gladly take them to our city attorney.
I've got the dumb questions. The first dumb question. I'm assuming, and I don't know if this ever happened in the past, but I'm assuming since if we voted for something that goes to council, they can supersede that, correct? So they have the ultimate authority.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one on the slides, number 6, but I can't think what it was. I have to go back and look. I guess that's the only dumb question I had. Obvious, but I just want to make sure I'm clear.
No, valid question, because it is not that way everywhere. So, yes, we have this whole chapter of the statute that defines what we can and can't do, but it does allow for flexibility on how the governing body structures that CRA. So there are some places that that's not the case, and CRAs stand on their own and they function on their own. There are some where the governing body is the CRA. So
that was the second question. Give me that. What would that? Is there an example you can give me of that where is the council actually the CRA as well? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm trying to think. I think actually, not Orlando. Yes, sir.
Big Jacksonville has 4 CRAs as of last year.
Yes.
They just closed one.
And they're a unique one because of how
Okay.
large their council is, how large Jacksonville's council is. It kind of,
Well, the council is the CRA.
Right.
Or a subset of the council is.
Yes.
They have no separate CRA boards. They have
Nope.
one by the airport that they just closed out.
Mhm.
And,
But their whole council cannot be, because they've got, 19, something like that on their council, is that right?
That's correct.
So they're almost sort of like committees.
yeah.
We have a DIA board, which is.
Right. And so Jacksonville's really unique
CRAs.
because of the DIA. So they have their whole separate entity under the Downtown Investment Authority, and that
Separate topic.
yeah, they get real, it's way over my head. But some places like, you see it a lot in Central Florida, especially in smaller communities in Central Florida, where you'll have a 5-person commission or a council. Zephyr Hills, that's what I was trying to think of.
Okay.
City of Zephyr Hills, they're booming right now, they've got a lot going on, but their 5-member commission is also their city council, and Gail Hamilton, their director, talked with her several times, and she literally will go to our CRA meeting, gets in front of the CRA, talks to the commission, they, talk, they do their meeting, they adjourn that meeting, and then they literally switch, she said, they switch chairs, they move places, and then they start their new meeting as the commission. Some places just prefer it that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Along those lines, governing documents and things that you were mentioning, one of the things that we're governed by also is our bylaws,
Mhm.
which are, something that the city council has approved.
Mhm.
CRA as well as city council have approved, and we made some recent changes to that to allow
Adding alternates.
the alternate positions and so forth, but that is some of our governing criteria.
Yes, but to be clear, and this has not happened to us, if something in chapter 163 changed and any part of our bylaws were against what that state statute says, then that part of the bylaws is null and void. Our bylaws don't supersede statute. Statute's always gonna trump everything.
I think they clearly state that.
Yeah, they do.
One thing that kind of came to mind is, as you were showing some of your documents, the graph and so forth, I think it would be very
one meeting, we had another meeting with our communications manager. We literally sat down for an hour and pulled it up on the screen and scrolled the website and pointed out, okay, this is wrong, this needs to shift. They are amending our contract with our folks that handle our website. And so we wanted some more vibrant elements to ours, very similar to if you go to the police department section, it's got a lot more pictures, it's got the scrolling banners, it's a lot more vibrant. But that's a different package apparently with our vendor, I don't know. Anyway, they're amending that literally as we speak, and we are working with them to make ours better, make the information current and not so complicated. Because I do agree, it's very challenging, and that's not fair to the
I
public.
appreciate it, and I'm glad you're looking at that already. The other thing that I think might be helpful, maybe it's just me, but can we get the latest plan documents for the downtown as well as the South District? I know you presented to us some changes for the downtown recently, and I think we saw a work in progress. I'm not sure that I've seen the final document.
No, that was the final. It couldn't have gone to council if it wasn't the final. It just wasn't, it didn't have bright colors, but the document that was approved at that meeting, that is the downtown plan. And that's what then went to city council, and then city council approved.
It would be helpful for me if I could get a copy of each and really understand
Okay.
what our plan includes.
This might be good for anyone who's in 2025 now.
Sure.
I think that would be real good.
I'm sorry.
So I concur that anyone who's going to be joining the board in 2025, I think it would be good for them to have that as a good starting point.
Certainly. Are there any other comments, questions from the board? Megan? From the lawyers?
I'm not gonna lie, I was a little scared. I kept looking to make sure she didn't look like,
I was thinking, I'm like, do you want to go to law school? Have you thought about that? No, I was familiar with a lot of sunshine law and all, but like some of these cases, I'm familiar with some eminent domain, but even some of these cases, they get pretty crazy. Like,
yes.
crazy.
I took a whole legal class at the conference this year, and it was very interesting. I mean, I scratched the surface on these cases, but the amount of cases that have come out of kind of both into the spectrum CREs trying to push it and not really following what was allowed, and then that led to the 2019 tightening of the reins, and then also communities who, and this goes back to making sure our website is current and following sunshine, having open meetings so the public understands what we do, citizens and business owners turning around and suing cities and or CRAs because they think that somehow they're doing something wrong with income revenue. It's very interesting.
And it's never going to be totally to bed.
No.
Like it's just going to keep coming up and coming up.
You see a lot in South Florida.
Oh yeah, and then you always leave a workshop and true like legal workshop, right? It's like, well, it depends, you know. And there's no like set, okay, this is done. You have
And you ask one attorney, one redevelopment attorney, and then you ask another, and then you ask another.
They're the worst.
Yeah, it's just everyone interprets things so uniquely. So it's always fun at conferences because the panel is usually made up of, gosh, I think this year there was 5 or 6 attorneys, and it was actually really entertaining. I hope none of them are listening. But it was very entertaining to kind of watch somebody give an opinion, and then another one kind of look and say, no, I don't agree with that. And then another one tried to, well, but hold on. There was a lot to learn.
Lively.
Yeah.
Very lively, for sure.
Yeah.
That's great. I thought it was great.
One thing before I forget, Mr. Chair, if I may, I made a note at the city attorney's presentation about, where was it? It had to, our meetings. Talking about giving the public, right of public participation, I did want to clarify that the reason council has briefings and we have workshops and there is not public comment is because as defined in the statute, it says at which the board takes official action. So at any meeting where we're taking action, the public has to be allowed the right to speak, because council briefings and CRE workshops and joint workshops, we're not taking any action. That is why there's no public comment. I'm sure everyone's kind of aware, but I made a little note to touch on that. And that is a good opportunity. That's why when we had big things, like we had all the Latham Plaza workshops back when we were doing Sunshine Park, we did all the playground workshops, passive park, all those things. That's why we tend to have those workshops, so you guys can have that opportunity in a public meeting to have necessary conversations before then the next meeting when it will be anticipated that action is taken.
I also just want to make sure that all of the board members are aware that
because I know this time of year is great, but a little crazy.
When you say kind of wacky, what do you mean?
So normally, like the 27th is the fourth Monday, so that would typically be our regular meeting, but that is not our regular meeting in January. That is our joint workshop with City Council, so that will not be a regular meeting. No action will be taken. It is also later than usual to accommodate everyone's schedules, and I'm going to add a third curveball. It's not here. It's in the community center, Parks and Recreation, that the CRA so graciously provided the city with. Because they are doing more renovations in here, something.
The audio.
That's right, we are getting all the new AV equipment finally, and so that'll take place at Parks. But again, I promise I will send calendar invites and about 10 days out start reminding everyone. And then the 15th of January, which is a Wednesday, and that is typically when we would have a workshop. We do have some facade grant applications that have come in that do need to be reviewed and voted on. So our typical workshop of January is actually going to be our regular January meeting. We typically do that when we have to move around just because we schedule our workshops and regular meetings with the clerk's office literally a year out. So all of our tentative dates are already held, so that's why we kind of move things around.
Well, that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I know I just kind of word vomited a lot of stuff at you guys. I promise I will put it all digital and send calendar invites and remind everybody.
Megan, did you have something?
Yep, just, this is for Taylor for the workshop. Is a public notice for the workshops, and they can attend if they want to attend?
Absolutely, yes. So our workshops have never been private, and I can't imagine they ever will be, just because there's no action taken, we just don't have public comment.
And then as far as notice that's being posted on the website is what's then being noticed?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, and the clerk's office handles all of our noticing. We all use the same platform internally, so every department that has, so we've got Planning Commission, Board of Adjustment, Council, CRA, Pension, all of our boards, we all use the same platform, and then the notice is automatically published through there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.